Some moments change your life not because of what you say, but because of who hears you say it. The chandeliers above Romano's Italian steakhouse shimmered against polished marble floors while crystal glasses caught the warm glow of candlelight, reflecting the kind of wealth that made ordinary people lower their voices without realizing it. Every table had gone quiet the instant Vincent Romano walked through the front entrance. At 36, the white-haired bistressnot-age mafia boss carried himself with calm authority rather than loud intimidation, his tailored charcoal suit fitting like armor and his measured footsteps filling the room with silent expectation. Business leaders stood to greet him. Servers straightened their uniforms. Even the restaurant pianist slowed his hands for a heartbeat before continuing the melody. Only one person didn't seem impressed. Ava Brooks balanced a polished serving tray against one hand as she crossed the dining room, her dark skin glowing beneath the amber lights, her crisp white shirt perfectly pressed despite working a double shift that had already stretched beyond 10 exhausting hours. She had learned long ago that confidence looked almost identical to composure, even when your feet ached and your rent was due in 4 days. The hostess whispered that table 7 belonged to Mr. Romano and that every detail had to be flawless. Ava nodded once and approached with practiced professionalism, setting down sparkling water before anyone asked. One of Vincent's associates frowned immediately. "This isn't the bottle we requested." Ava glanced toward the label, realizing another server had accidentally switched the order moments earlier. "I'll correct it right away, sir." Before she could lift the bottle, Vincent looked up, his steel blue eyes locking onto hers with unmistakable irritation. "Do people stop paying attention after 8 hours on the clock?" His voice remained controlled, but every nearby conversation instantly disappeared. Ava apologized quietly and reached for the bottle. "I said look at me when I'm speaking." The words landed heavier than the mistake deserved. Several guests turned toward the scene, curiosity spreading faster than the aroma of fresh bread. Another associate leaned back with a smirk, already expecting the young waitress to shrink beneath the pressure. Instead, Ava slowly raised her eyes and studied Vincent's face with startling focus. She wasn't looking at his expression. She wasn't looking at his expensive watch. She was looking beyond him, toward the mirrored wine display reflecting every person seated behind his chair. Something in that reflection made the color drain from her face for the briefest instant before determination replaced surprise. Vincent mistook her silence for defiance. "Did you not hear me?" His tone sharpened just enough to send another wave of silence across the room. Every server froze in place. Glasses stopped halfway to lips. Forks rested above untouched meals. Then Ava inhaled once, set the serving tray onto the nearest empty chair with steady hands, met Vincent Romano's eyes without hesitation, and spoke clearly enough for every person inside the restaurant to hear. "Shout at me again," she said evenly, "and I'll end you." No one moved. No one breathed. The pianist's hands hovered above the keys without pressing another note. A wine glass slipped from someone's fingers and rolled harmlessly across a linen tablecloth. Vincent Romano slowly rose from his chair, never taking his eyes off the waitress who had just challenged the most respected man in the room, and for the first time that evening, Ava Brooks wasn't afraid. A full 10 seconds passed before anyone dared to move. Vincent Romano remained standing, his expression unreadable, while every instinct in the room expected an explosion that never came. Instead, he noticed something no one else seemed to see. Ava Brooks was not looking at him anymore. Her eyes shifted for less than a second toward the polished mirror behind the wine display before returning to his face. There was fear in those eyes, but strangely, it was not fear of him. It was fear for him. Vincent had built an empire by trusting patterns more than words, and that single detail kept him from reacting the way everyone expected. Around them, nervous whispers spread through the restaurant. Some guests quietly reached for their phones before deciding against it. Others exchanged uncertain glances, convinced they were witnessing the end of a young waitress who had made the worst mistake of her life. Ava did not move an inch. Her breathing remained steady, her shoulders relaxed, and her hands rested naturally at her sides. Only someone standing close enough would have noticed the tiny tremor in her fingertips. She was not fearless. She was choosing courage over fear. Across the dining room, the restaurant manager hurried forward, his face pale. "Mr. Romano, I am so sorry. She is one of our best employees. Please allow me to handle this." Vincent raised one finger without taking his eyes off Ava, silently stopping the manager in his tracks. Nobody spoke again. The silence became almost uncomfortable. Outside, rain tapped softly against the front windows, and the flashing lights of passing traffic reflected across the marble floor like ripples on dark water. Vincent slowly stepped away from his chair. Every polished shoe echoed through the dining room as he closed the distance between them. One step. Then another. His security team instinctively shifted forward, but Vincent subtly motioned for them to remain where they were. He stopped only a few feet from Ava. "Most people spend their lives trying not to offend me," he said quietly. "You just did the exact opposite." Ava met his gaze without hesitation. She wanted to speak. Every instinct told her not yet. It was too early. The wrong word could send everything in the wrong direction. Vincent studied her face with increasing curiosity. There was no hatred. No arrogance. No panic. Only urgency. Years of negotiating impossible situations had taught him that people revealed themselves through their eyes long before they revealed themselves through their mouths. Whatever this young woman had meant, she believed every word she had said. At a nearby table, one of Vincent's longtime associates laughed nervously. "Boss, she is bluffing. Let us get back to dinner." Vincent did not answer. Instead, his attention drifted almost imperceptibly toward the mirrored wine display behind Ava. The reflection captured dozens of tiny details hidden from direct view. Waiters moving between tables. Guests enjoying expensive meals. A bartender polishing glasses. A man in a navy blazer sitting alone near the back corner with a menu that had remained unopened for nearly 20 minutes. Vincent narrowed his eyes. The man had not touched his drink once. He had not ordered food. He had barely moved. Before Vincent could think further, Ava's expression changed almost invisibly. Her pupils widened. Her jaw tightened. Whatever she had been watching was beginning to happen. Vincent followed Ava's line of sight without turning his head enough to reveal his curiosity. Years of surviving impossible situations had taught him that the smallest movement could change everything, and tonight every detail suddenly seemed to matter. The man in the navy blazer remained seated alone near the back corner, but now Vincent noticed something even stranger. A server approached his table twice, yet the man politely declined both water and food. He had reserved one of the most expensive tables in the restaurant, arrived nearly 30 minutes earlier, and still had not ordered a single item from the menu resting untouched in front of him. That was not how ordinary customers behaved. Ava recognized the same pattern because she had spent the last 4 years watching people for a living. Waiting tables was never only about carrying plates. It was about reading faces before they spoke, noticing celebrations before the first toast, recognizing arguments before voices became louder, and understanding who wanted conversation and who wanted silence. Earlier that evening, the quiet guest had smiled politely at every employee, yet his eyes had never followed the menu, the wine list, or the people around him. They had returned again and again to Vincent's table. At first Ava had dismissed it as curiosity. Then she noticed something that made her pulse quicken. Every few minutes, another diner somewhere else in the restaurant glanced briefly toward the same corner before looking away. None of them acknowledged each other openly. None exchanged words. Yet the timing felt too precise to be coincidence. She had seen that kind of silent coordination once before during a crisis management course she attended years earlier, where instructors explained how groups sometimes communicated through ordinary routines that appeared meaningless to everyone else. Most people would never notice. Ava did. Vincent slowly adjusted the cuff of his jacket as if nothing unusual had happened. His associates interpreted the gesture as calm confidence, but it was actually an excuse to study the reflections in the polished silver pitcher beside the table. Reflections often revealed what direct vision concealed. In the curved surface, he saw the man in the navy blazer briefly check the elegant wristwatch on his left arm before looking toward the front entrance. Seconds later, another customer entered carrying a folded umbrella even though the rain outside had almost stopped. The newcomer did not remove his coat immediately. Instead, he paused just long enough to scan the dining room before taking a seat near the windows. Vincent felt an unfamiliar sensation. It was not fear. It was uncertainty. Ava finally understood why everything had seemed wrong from the moment Vincent arrived. Individually, each guest appeared perfectly ordinary. Together, their behavior formed a pattern that no longer felt accidental. She wished she could explain everything with a single sentence, but there was no safe way to do it in a crowded restaurant filled with strangers whose intentions she could not know. If she spoke too soon, she might be dismissed as dramatic. If she waited too long, an opportunity to prevent a serious mistake could disappear. Vincent looked directly into her eyes once more, searching for any sign that she had invented the entire confrontation. Instead, he found only quiet conviction. For the first time in many years, he decided to trust someone whose name he had learned less than 5 minutes earlier. The room remained frozen, but beneath the polished calm of the restaurant, invisible currents were beginning to shift. Vincent casually reached for the sparkling water that had started the entire confrontation, yet instead of taking a sip, he placed the glass back onto the white tablecloth exactly where it had been. It was a simple movement, almost meaningless to everyone watching. Ava understood immediately. He had chosen not to interrupt whatever she believed she had noticed. It was the first silent conversation they had shared. The manager, still standing several feet away, looked helpless. Every instinct told him to escort Ava into the office and apologize to his most influential customer. Yet Vincent had offered no such instruction. The uncertainty spread through the staff until every server seemed to move more carefully than before, afraid that even the sound of a plate touching a table might shatter the strange silence. Ava forced herself to breathe slowly. Her grandmother had often told her that panic narrowed vision while patience widened it. She needed to see everything. The reflections in the mirrored wine display revealed more than the dining room itself. The man in the navy blazer quietly folded his menu without reading it. Near the windows, the guest carrying the umbrella checked his phone, but the screen remained dark. At the bar, another customer rotated his untouched coffee cup exactly 1/4 turn before resting both hands on the counter. None of those actions seemed suspicious alone. Together, they felt rehearsed. Vincent noticed the same rhythm emerging. He had negotiated billion-dollar deals, survived betrayals, and built an organization where trust was earned over years instead of days. He recognized coordination when he saw it, even when he could not yet explain it. His associates continued speaking among themselves, unaware that their conversations had become background noise. They believed the evening had merely become awkward. Vincent and Ava knew something else was unfolding. A waiter passed behind Vincent carrying a tray of fresh bread. Ava watched the reflection instead of the waiter himself. As the tray briefly blocked the mirror, every person she had been observing disappeared from view at the same instant. When the reflection cleared less than 2 seconds later, each of them had changed position ever so slightly. One chair had shifted a few inches. A jacket had been removed. A napkin now rested on a different side of a plate. Tiny adjustments. Deliberate adjustments. Her heartbeat quickened because she remembered a lesson from years earlier during emergency response training. People acting independently rarely moved in synchronized sequences. People following a shared plan often did. She looked back at Vincent, hoping he would understand without forcing her to speak openly. His expression remained calm, but his eyes sharpened with quiet focus. He gave the smallest nod, so subtle that no one else in the restaurant appeared to notice it. It was not permission. It was acknowledgement. He believed that she had seen something real. Across the dining room, the grandfather clock mounted beside the private wine cellar began striking the hour. Each deep chime echoed through the restaurant with measured precision. As the final note faded into silence, Ava caught one more detail reflected in the polished glass. The man in the navy blazer smiled for the first time that evening, not at anyone seated nearby, but at his own reflection, as though he had been waiting for that exact moment to arrive. The final echo of the grandfather clock disappeared into the quiet, and with it, every loose piece of the puzzle seemed to fall into place inside Ava's mind. She no longer believed she was watching unrelated strangers sharing the same dining room. She was watching people waiting for the exact same moment. Vincent noticed her expression change. Until now she had been uncertain. Now she looked absolutely convinced. Without breaking eye contact, he casually adjusted the position of his chair by a few inches, giving himself a wider view of the mirrored wall without making the movement appear intentional. His associates assumed he was preparing to sit back down, but instead he remained standing. The man in the navy blazer noticed it as well. For the first time that evening, his attention drifted away from the mirror and settled directly on Vincent. The moment lasted less than a second before he looked away again, pretending to admire the wine collection. Ava felt the weight of time pressing against every heartbeat. If she tried to explain what she had observed, she would sound irrational. She had no proof. Only patterns. Reflections. Tiny movements that meant nothing by themselves but everything together. She remembered what one of her emergency response instructors had once repeated during every training exercise. When there is no time to explain, create enough disruption to stop the sequence. Those words returned with startling clarity. She realized that the confrontation she had already created had interrupted whatever rhythm had been unfolding inside the restaurant. The synchronized movements had paused. The silent coordination had broken. Whoever had been expecting an ordinary dinner was now forced to adjust. Vincent slowly folded the white linen napkin beside his untouched plate. His calm exterior never changed, but internally he reached the same conclusion. The young waitress had not been reckless. She had deliberately interrupted something. Whether she was right or wrong remained uncertain, yet her actions had already changed the behavior of several people across the room. That alone made her impossible to ignore. Near the windows, the guest with the umbrella quietly stood and walked toward the coat rack before stopping halfway, as though reconsidering the decision. At the bar, the customer with the coffee finally lifted the cup but placed it back down without taking a sip. The man in the navy blazer checked his watch once more before giving the smallest nod toward no one in particular. Ava caught the gesture in the mirror. So did Vincent. Neither of them spoke. The restaurant still looked elegant, peaceful, and completely ordinary to everyone else. Soft music floated through the room. Candles flickered gently. Glasses reflected warm golden light across polished tables. Yet beneath that picture of luxury, an invisible contest of patience had begun. Vincent looked directly at Ava again, and this time there was no anger in his eyes. There was a question. Ava answered it without speaking. She gave the slightest shake of her head, silently telling him not to return to his seat yet. He trusted the warning. For perhaps the first time in his adult life, one of the most powerful men in the city allowed his next decision to be guided by an ordinary waitress whose courage had disrupted far more than a quiet evening. Vincent slowly returned his attention to the people seated at his own table, speaking with such ordinary calm that no one listening could have guessed his priorities had completely changed. He apologized for the unexpected interruption and suggested that everyone enjoy the evening while the restaurant staff corrected the misunderstanding. His words sounded effortless, but Ava recognized what he was really doing. He was giving the room permission to relax. Within seconds, conversations cautiously resumed. Crystal glasses clinked once again. The pianist continued the melody that had been interrupted. Laughter slowly returned, although softer than before. To everyone else, the uncomfortable moment appeared to be ending. Ava knew it had only entered its most dangerous phase. The mirrored wine display reflected a subtle transformation across the dining room. The guests she had been watching began acting naturally again, but now their movements no longer matched one another. Whatever sequence had existed earlier had been interrupted. The man in the navy blazer unfolded his menu for the first time, yet his eyes never focused on the words. The customer with the umbrella finally removed his coat and politely thanked a nearby server. At the bar, the untouched coffee disappeared as its owner requested a fresh cup instead. Small changes. Improvised changes. Vincent quietly noticed the same thing. He had spent years recognizing the difference between confidence and adaptation. These people were adapting. That realization confirmed more than any spoken warning ever could. One of Vincent's trusted associates leaned closer. "Should we leave?" he whispered. Vincent answered without looking away from the dining room. "Not yet." His voice remained steady, almost casual, but Ava heard it clearly. He had chosen patience over impulse. She admired that decision because rushing would only create confusion. The restaurant manager finally approached her with trembling hands, expecting Vincent to demand that she be dismissed immediately. Instead, Vincent turned toward the manager and smiled politely. "She stays exactly where she is." The manager blinked in disbelief before nodding repeatedly and stepping back. Several employees exchanged astonished glances. Only moments earlier they had feared Ava would lose her job. Now the city's most influential customer had quietly ensured she would keep it. Ava offered no expression of relief. Her attention remained fixed on the reflections dancing across polished glass and silver. Then another detail emerged. A couple near the fireplace stood to leave, but instead of walking directly toward the exit, they paused beside the dessert display as though waiting for someone else to move first. Across the room, the man in the navy blazer folded his napkin with remarkable precision and rested both hands on the table. Vincent saw it too. Without exchanging another word, he reached for the sparkling water at last and deliberately lifted the glass. The polished surface briefly reflected Ava's face beside his own. Their eyes met for less than a heartbeat. She gave the slightest nod. He understood. Whatever had been planned for that evening had already unraveled, not because of force or intimidation, but because one observant waitress had recognized a pattern no one else could see, and one powerful man had chosen to trust quiet conviction instead of wounded pride. As the evening slowly regained its rhythm, the invisible tension that had filled the restaurant began dissolving into something else entirely. One by one, the guests Ava had quietly watched throughout the night abandoned the strange routines that had first captured her attention. The couple near the fireplace requested their check without another pause. The customer with the umbrella thanked the hostess and stepped outside into the light rain. The man in the navy blazer finally ordered dinner after nearly an hour of ignoring the menu, yet even that decision felt less like confidence and more like someone accepting that the evening had not unfolded as expected. Vincent remained where he was for another several minutes, speaking comfortably with his associates while observing every reflection available to him. Nothing about his posture suggested concern. That calm was intentional. Whoever had been studying him would see only a composed businessman enjoying an expensive meal. Ava continued serving nearby tables with the same professionalism she had shown before everything changed. She refilled coffee, delivered desserts, and smiled politely at families celebrating birthdays, yet her awareness never faded. She noticed that the coordinated glances had disappeared. The synchronized timing had ended. Whatever silent pattern had existed before had dissolved into ordinary human behavior. Only then did she allow herself a slow breath she had been holding for what felt like an entire hour. Vincent quietly excused himself from his table and walked toward the entrance as though preparing to leave. Before stepping outside, he paused beside the service station where Ava was arranging clean glasses. Neither of them looked directly at the other. "You noticed something," he said softly. Ava nodded once. "I noticed people who stopped behaving like strangers." Vincent remained silent for a moment, considering those words. They were simple, yet they perfectly described what his instincts had been trying to explain. "How did you learn to see that?" he finally asked. Ava carefully placed the final glass onto the shelf before answering. "Years ago I completed emergency response training while helping care for my father after he became seriously ill. They taught us that when people are frightened, they become unpredictable. When people follow the same hidden plan, they become predictable. Tonight I recognize the difference." Vincent looked at her with genuine respect, replacing every trace of irritation. She had not claimed certainty. She had trusted observation, patience, and responsibility. Those qualities were rarer than influence or money. The restaurant manager approached nervously, expecting another difficult conversation, but Vincent smiled warmly before the man could speak. "Take good care of her," he said. "Employees who pay attention are impossible to replace." The manager blinked with relief and immediately agreed. As Vincent walked toward the waiting car outside, he glanced once more through the restaurant windows. Ava had already returned to clearing another table. Treating every guest with the same quiet professionalism as if nothing extraordinary had happened. She did not seek recognition. She did not expect gratitude. She simply believed that if something seemed wrong, ignoring it was never the right choice. Watching her disappear into the warm light of the dining room, Vincent realized that real authority was not measured by how many people obeyed you. Sometimes it was measured by whether you were wise enough to listen when an ordinary person found the courage to speak. The following afternoon, long after the restaurant had reopened for lunch, the events of the previous evening had already become part of quiet conversation among the staff. Some believed Ava had been unbelievably brave. Others insisted she had simply been lucky. Ava ignored every opinion. She folded fresh napkins, polished silverware until it reflected the ceiling lights, and greeted every guest with the same warm smile she had offered before Vincent Romano had ever walked through the door. She did not expect her life to change because of one unusual night. Around 3 o'clock, a black luxury sedan stopped outside the restaurant. It was impossible to miss, yet no one climbed out immediately. Several employees glanced through the windows, instantly recognizing the vehicle from the night before. Minutes later, Vincent entered alone, dressed more casually than anyone had seen him before in a navy sport coat and open-collar shirt. The dining room felt unusually quiet once again, but this time there was no tension in his expression. He asked the hostess for a table in Ava's section. The request surprised everyone. When Ava approached, she carried only a glass of ice water and a menu. "Good afternoon, Mr. Romano," she said with the same calm professionalism she showed every customer. "Welcome back." Vincent smiled gently. "This time I am only here for lunch." She placed the menu in front of him and prepared to step away, but Vincent spoke again. "Yesterday you trusted what you observed instead of what everyone else believed. That is uncommon." Ava hesitated before answering. "I only paid attention." Vincent nodded slowly. Most people stop paying attention when they assume they already know the answer. Their conversation lasted only a few minutes before another table needed service, and Ava excused herself without expecting anything more. She treated him exactly as she treated every guest. She refilled drinks, recommended the chef's special, and thanked families for dining with them. Vincent watched quietly from across the room. He noticed that every employee respected Ava, not because she demanded attention, but because she consistently helped others before being asked. When a new server accidentally dropped a stack of menus, Ava was the first to kneel beside her and gather them with an encouraging smile. When an elderly couple struggled to read the lunch specials, she patiently described every dish without rushing them. There was no audience for those moments. No recognition. They were simply part of who she was. Before leaving, Vincent requested the manager. The entire staff expected another important business conversation, but instead Vincent pointed toward Ava. "Promote her to shift supervisor when the opportunity comes," he said quietly. "If you want this restaurant to succeed, put your trust in the person who notices what everyone else overlooks." The manager smiled with visible relief. After Vincent departed, he repeated those exact words to Ava. She stood speechless for several seconds, not because of the promotion itself, but because someone powerful had chosen to recognize character instead of status. For the first time since that extraordinary evening, she allowed herself a small smile, understanding that respect earned through quiet integrity often lasted much longer than respect demanded through fear. Several weeks passed, and the extraordinary evening gradually faded into memory for nearly everyone except the people whose lives it had quietly transformed. Customers continued filling the restaurant each night, celebrating anniversaries, birthdays, and ordinary Tuesdays that felt special beneath the warm lights and polished wood. Ava settled naturally into her new responsibilities, not because of the title she had earned, but because she approached every shift exactly as she always had. She learned the names of regular guests, encouraged nervous new employees, and noticed the smallest details that others often overlooked. If a child looked uncomfortable, she found a quieter table. If an elderly couple struggled with the menu, she patiently explained every choice. If a server seemed overwhelmed, she stepped in before anyone needed to ask. Those quiet habits became the standard for the entire staff. One evening, Vincent Romano returned once again, this time accompanied by several respected business leaders from across the city. The manager immediately offered the private dining room, but Vincent politely declined and requested an ordinary table in the main dining area. As dinner progressed, one of his guests noticed Ava coordinating the staff with calm confidence. "Is that the waitress you mentioned?" the man asked. Vincent looked across the room for a moment before answering. "No," he said with a faint smile. "That is the woman who reminded me that paying attention is more valuable than making assumptions." His guests followed his gaze and saw nothing extraordinary. They saw a supervisor checking on customers, helping a young employee balance a heavy tray, and thanking the kitchen staff before delivering another order. They saw kindness expressed through ordinary actions instead of dramatic speeches. Later that evening, a new employee accidentally apologized to Ava for interrupting her work. Ava smiled warmly and replied, "Helping each other is never an interruption." A nearby server overheard those words and quietly repeated them the next day. Before long, the simple phrase became something the staff often said to one another during busy shifts. The atmosphere inside the restaurant slowly changed. Employees became more attentive. Guests noticed the difference. Positive reviews increased, not because the food had changed, but because people felt genuinely cared for from the moment they walked through the front door. As Vincent prepared to leave after dinner, he paused near the entrance and looked back one final time. Ava was laughing softly with a family celebrating their daughter's graduation, making certain every photograph included everyone at the table. She never noticed Vincent watching. She did not need to. The greatest acts of character rarely happen in search of recognition. They happen when no reward is expected at all. Vincent stepped outside into the cool evening air with a deeper understanding than he had possessed only weeks earlier. Wealth could command attention. Influence could command obedience. Fear could command silence. But only humility could earn genuine respect. Inside the restaurant, life continued exactly as it always had, yet every person who worked there carried forward a lesson born from one unforgettable evening. Sometimes the strongest voice belongs to the person everyone overlooks, and sometimes the wisest decision a powerful person can make is to stop speaking long enough to listen. And on that quiet corner of the city, people slowly forgot the confrontation that had begun it all, but they never forgot what dignity looked like when someone chose to protect it.